Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the LATAM Stocks Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Flood. Today, I'm speaking with Pedro Dejneka. Pedro is the co-founder of MD Commodities, where they provide agro commodity research, macro analysis, focused specifically with especially on South America, which is a really interesting perspective. I think a lot of global investors miss the South American commodities market. So I'm really excited to talk to Pedro and hear what he's working on. So, hi, Pedro.
Patrick, absolutely pleasure, man. Thanks for the invite. Great to be here.
Yeah, man. I'm really excited to talk to you. So I want to start off and hear a little more about your background. So, where are you from? How'd you end up doing South American commodities?
Yeah, for sure. So, I come from a small town in Brazil and born in a small town called Cambé. And then I grew up in Londrina in the state of Paraná, and that's in southern Brazil. And grew up there just quite frankly, never really thought that I was, if you had asked me 25 years ago, I guess, when I still had a little bit of hair, you had asked me, hey, you're going to be working passionately with agricultural commodities. I would, you're out of your mind. I always thought I was going to do something in sports or, even when I started my career, I started in the financial markets, working for some of the big investment banks and, but more focused on the financial side of things. So, come from Brazil, came to the U.S. when I was about 16 years old, had a childhood dream of playing basketball. You see the Chicago Bulls stuff behind me. I still hold on to the golden era of the Bulls. It was back in the 90s. And I try to stay loyal. It's a little difficult these days, but, basketball is a big part of our family. And I came when I was 16 years old. So I convinced my dad and he believed in me and gave me a chance. We didn't have a lot of money back then. He actually borrowed money from my aunt. He borrowed $5,000 and to put me on the exchange student program and said, son, that's all I had, and my mom had passed away when I was 10 years old, had some medical issues. And so all the medical bills and things like that basically wiped us out. And he still took a chance on me, and so I always like to, anytime I have a chance to talk a little bit about myself, I bring that up because I think it's important to recognize the things that our parents do for us, and especially at a time that, quite frankly, I didn't have a lot of people believing in me. I was a little kid from Brazil, and you're saying, I want to go play college basketball in the United States. This is 1995, right? So internet really wasn't widespread. And so they just looked at me as he's just a big dreamer. He's just a dreamer. His dad's throwing money away, kind of deal. Well, I puts a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. Right. And my dad believed in me, man, and they put me on a plane. And I called him the very next day, and I said, I want to go back. I can't do this. But it was very funny, man. I arrived in the United States, and great family, great place in Indiana, and arrived, and I'm like, listen, I can't do this. I'm here alone. I don't know anybody, and I thought I was going to be strong enough to do this. And he says, well, guess what, buddy? You're staying.
This is what you're going to learn, right? Basketball or no basketball, you're going to learn something, right?
You wanted to pursue that dream, right? So, long story short, I actually ended up, put through a lot of hard work and some lucky breaks along the way, but I lost a lot of people that were willing to help me. I think they saw that I was willing to work hard on the court, off the court. Got the looks I needed, ended up getting a basketball scholarship. So I graduated here in the U.S. I played varsity basketball, also played little varsity soccer. Couldn't help myself growing up in Brazil, But so I did that, and then after that, I graduated with a degree in economics and specialization in finance and investments. Then went to Brazil, played a little professional basketball for a little bit, but then had a job offer from a investment bank in the U.S. and came back and was doing that. Did my MBA and things like that. So ended up staying in the U.S. And then in 2008, I migrated from the financial world. Strictly, I was working private banking and migrated to the commodities side. My wife probably thought I was crazy. I was sort of starting over my career when I was, about 30 years old and going into the commodities side. The best thing I ever did. We always wanted to find, you and I were talking prior, right? And I always wanted to find that bridge that I was going to be able to connect between the U.S., my experience in the U.S. and Brazil. And I always thought it was going to be sports. I've always been really passionate about sports. I still coach basketball in my off time, and my two sons play, and I coach them as well. And, now getting in advanced stages of youth sports and things like that. But for me, agriculture, I received a job offer there to be in work for RJ O'Brien in Chicago with some wonderful people and learn about the business. And the rest is sort of history. Been ever since working in agricultural commodities. Obviously, can't just focus on soybeans, corn, and cotton and not talk about macroeconomics, currency, geopolitics, and things like that. And then back in 2000 and end of 2016, beginning of 2017, started what today is AMD Commodities with a wonderful business partner, Ismael Menezes, who is in Brazil. So we have an office in Brazil. I stay in the US, but we travel a lot and things like that. And today we cover around 10 million acres, just shy of 5 million hectares of land in consulting, basically. So for big farmers, hire us to help them make decisions as far as selling, their cotton, corn, and soybeans, and hedging all of the geopolitical macroeconomic risks that are out there.
Yeah, your profile stood out to me right away because you talked about the bridge between the U.S. and Brazil, and they're both such big economies, and agro's such a big commonality, right? The two countries have so much in common, and there's a ton of Brazilians that are brilliant, and they specialize in the Brazilian market, and then there's, all the smart Americans that know nothing about Brazil. And I'm surprised I don't see more people like you that specialize in both sides and understand Brazil and the U.S. So can you maybe just explain a little bit about how important is Brazil as an agro market?
Extremely. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And you see it, and you and I connected not too long ago, and we really understand why Brazil is so important. A lot of times people are like, "Oh, you're Brazilian." No, I'm not talking. No, I'm not talking my book here, if you will.
Yeah.
The reality is that obviously the United States is extremely important in agriculture. Brazil has really grown almost exponentially in the last 10 years, really. Yep. So you're look at we had a chat, earlier this week, and I was explaining to you the corn situation, for instance.
Yeah.
We had Brazil 3 years ago produced 85 million metric tons of corn 3 years ago and exported only 20. And this year, 2023, Brazil is going to export almost 60 and produced 137. And so when you look in percentage terms, not just in tonnage, and by the way, Brazil took over the number one spot in world corn exports.
I told you, I grew up in corn country. Right? When I saw that, I said, where did that come from? And that's insane. Right. What you just said is they exported more this year than they grew in total 3 years ago.
Oh, not quite. Not quite.
No,
they
sorry.
grew 85.
Okay.
Yeah, it grew 85. But again, it's a ridiculous number because actually, Brazilian corn crop is divided in two, right? You have one, which is the summer crop. So obviously you have great weather down there for a lot of the country, tropical weather. So a lot of the farmers, depending on where they are, they can plant two crops. And so
that's not common globally, right? With corn, that's not something most countries can do, globally. Right?
Correct. U.S. can't really do that. Not in the volumes that Brazil can do. I guess that's what I'm. And again, it's not because the U.S. farmer doesn't know how to do that. It's not because it's simply
climate.
Brazil is a blessed land. With the natural resources that Brazil has. Brazil, if you stop and think about it, it is one of the very, very few countries in the world that can truly be self-sustainable. Brazil's self-sustained. Yeah. Right. So if you say crude oil, Brazil has it. If you say food, Brazil has it. If you say metals, Brazil has it. Industrial metals, et cetera. So it's the richness of a country that, by the way, has for years, decades fought political instability and economic instability. And I think we're reaching an era here where a lot of folks are starting to understand, wait a second, this isn't just an agricultural power. Brazil is a global economic power for the years to come. And the potential is there for a lot of great things. Now, again, Brazil has to stay out of its own way. Politically, we like to complicate things from time to time. But even so, I think the entrepreneurial spirit of the Brazilian people, we talk about a lot of the Brazilian people that are here overseas in the U.S. and other spots, other places. I always like to put it this way. Brazilians grow up, at least my generation, Patrick, we grew up or especially our parents' generation, grew up not ever being able to have a plan.
Right.
You couldn't. Right. Because if you plan for something, it's going to go wrong. Back in I'm thinking late 80s, early 90s.
Hyperinflation, right? You couldn't even plan how much your groceries were going to be a month from now, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. I remember literally going to the store as a kid, in the morning. And at the time, they're putting the tag, the price tags in each product, right? And I remember you go at night and there would be the workers putting brand new tags because the next day it was more expensive. And I remember like you got paid, you had to go to the store to buy the stuff before it went up in prices. I remember also, I don't know, we changed currencies. I got to get the exact number, but I think four or five times in between the 80s and the early 90s.
You're on your 8th since World War II, I think.
It's insane. Yeah. It's truly insane. So again, so that instability though, you know, they always say hard times creates great men kind of deal, right? So it's kind of where Brazil has had to fight so many things internally for so many years that the generation, you know, I talked about me having a little bit of a chip on my shoulder with the doubters that I had. He's never going to get a college scholarship in basketball. He's crazy. He's never going to play pro. He's not. Well, I did, you know, and so he gets that it has that chip on your shoulder. Sometimes that can be a good thing. Other times you can get that chip can get a little heavy, but it really can be a motivating factor. So I feel that Brazil is now, this generation, really wanting to show what the country can do for the world. And agriculture, Patrick, look, if you talk about world agriculture today and take Brazil out of it, the world will starve. Yeah.
Yep. There were a lot of talks about when the Ukraine war started, right? The famine and everything. And sure, it's an important market, but like you can't lose 25% of beef exports and 33%, you know. And Brazil picked up the slack, right? They're still...
You just hit the nail on the head. Right. When the Ukraine war broke out, it's like my last name, Dejneka. That's in Ukraine. My grandparents came from the Ukraine. So I absolutely love Ukraine. I've been to Kiev a few times for work and, you know, some wonderful people there and just a human tragedy. It's awful what's happening over there, what's happening in the Middle East. But at the time that the war broke out and there was all this panic, right? The Economist goes out, the food crisis, yet another Economist cover.
1 billion people were going to die of famine. I saw that headline.
It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But then during that year, I remember I actually on Twitter, I went and I said, guys, is anybody looking at Brazil? Like this was the year this was the year after Brazil had the drought. And I said, guys, Brazil is going to produce 30 million metric tons more than it did last year. And it's going to pick up the slack that Ukraine is not going to be able to export. So really, honestly, the world will be just fine. And sure enough, it's exactly what happened. Yep. Right. So again, it's the media likes to make, you know, think about it, Patrick. Food is such a passionate subject because it is a basic necessity. Yep. And the media really likes to put fear. You know, I just read something, literally this morning, something came through. Why is the world running out of rice? Man, we're not running out of rice, man.
Because people dying of famine gets more clicks than Brazil's going to increase market share by 4% or something, right? Like that's not an exciting headline, but that's what happened.
That's
right.
It. So, hit the nail on the head.
So Brazil, it feels like they emerged, but they haven't, right? If you actually look at the charts, they've been slowly and steadily, like if you look at grain production, it's like a 3-point-something% CAGR for 20 years. So what are the things Brazil did 10 years ago to emerge now as this agro powerhouse? Was it policy?
Really
was it investment?
Combination. But honestly, it was the market. Okay. The market told Brazil that I always like to say this. If the economic incentive exists, the market will find a way. And you got to a point, this was right around 2005. When you had a boom in food commodity prices, right? Agricultural commodity prices, the ethanol program here in the United States, you know, took corn prices from $2 a bushel to $7, $8 a bushel. And then you had the drought in 2012 after the crisis, but really it started in 2006, 2005, 6, 7. Brazilian farmers didn't used to make that much money on their production. And then you had a situation where, wait a second, their margins started growing. You know, they all of a sudden started getting 15, 20% margin on 6 months of production. And well, Brazil has land. You know, I just came back from Ireland doing a presentation and, you know, Europe, the European media loves to beat up on Brazil and say that Brazilian farmers are destroying the Amazon to plant their crops. And it couldn't be further away from the truth. The reality is that Brazil today only uses 8% of its land for agricultural purposes. 22% is used for pasture land. And so what's been happening is that you've had a lot of pasture land integration and conversion into grain production. So that doesn't happen without investments, and investments don't happen without the market telling it that that's a good place to put money. You understand what I'm saying? So it wasn't like a magic, a president that we had or a policy. The market
capitalism at work, right? It had better margins that made them competitive globally, and they reinvested profits and continued to grow it.
Boom.
So I guess that brings me to the question, because there's two common criticisms I hear of Brazil's agro market, particularly from like geopolitical analysts that aren't specialized in Brazil the way you are. And for me, it's obvious that the first one is that Brazil's infrastructure and geography are suboptimal. I think that's just obviously false, because if you look at what they're exporting and how they've grown their exports, at what point is that going to matter? Right. So I'll ask you about that one. But then the other one that I don't know how to respond to is that Brazil needs to import fertilizers. And without these imports, the industry collapses. So I don't know if you could take those one by one and let me know what you think.
Sure. Again, I think about it this way. I'm going to use basketball as an analogy.
Do it.
When Michael Jordan was at the top of his game, the higher you go, the more people are trying to knock you down. Right? The more people are trying to find holes in your game or holes in your personal life or holes wherever they can find to bring you down. Unfortunately, that's human nature, right? And those arguments, I'll say this to you. Is there some truth to the arguments? Sure. Brazilian infrastructure, for instance, number one, right? It's far from ideal, meaning we still rely too much on trucking, right? So when you go to Brazil, for instance, doing harvest, you drive through what we call the BR-163, which is a highway, which is basically the BR-163 is the main artery of Brazilian agriculture. It goes right through the middle of the main producing state in Brazil, which is Mato Grosso. And you can get caught in lines of trucks, semi-trucks, full of soybeans, corn, et cetera, cotton, whatever it may be, for hours, right? So the infrastructure could be better, but that is a work in progress. But then you hit the nail in the head. It's just because it is not ideal, it doesn't mean that Brazil doesn't get the job done. And I have a slide that I show during my presentations when I go overseas, speaking about this exact point. I say, listen, if you know Brazilians and if you know Brazil is a country where things work, even when they're not supposed to work.
I thought you were going to say, jeitinho.
No, and that's exactly what I have. De jeitinho brasileiro. Yeah. I have actually a slide with a tic-tac-toe game. Okay. Basically shows, you don't really have a straight cross, but Brazilians kind of like, they kind of find a way. They do a jeitinho brasileiro. Yeah. And the point is that jeitinho brasileiro, which is the Brazilian way, there's a positive and there's a negative connotation to that. Yep. But it's because, again, going back to what I said earlier, that, Brazilians grow up having to come up with things last minute solutions to issues that many other countries or developed countries definitely don't have, right? So you kind of learn to fight your way through things. So, is the infrastructure where we believe it should be? No, there's still a lot of if we depend on trucking, we need to expand the roads, we need to do this, we need to do that. But I'll tell you something right now, there's also the other side to this. You look at something that we call the Northern Arc, which is basically a group of ports in northern Brazil that 10 years ago had very little relevance in agricultural exports. And now over 50% of the corn that's exported goes out through there, and around 35% of the soybeans exported goes out through the north. Where 10 years ago, those percentages were less than 10%. And right. So again, the improvements are happening, but it takes time.
And those northern ports, to hit on the geography point again, those northern ports are growing their export share because they're positioned in a way that those shipping routes make the product more competitive. Is that right?
Absolutely. More competitive. It cuts the time, and it's more competitive both for the exporter to get it out of there, right? Yep. So the buyers buy at a cheaper price, and depending on where they are, right? But also the farmers have much less cost transporting the farmers or the exporter, depending on how you do the contract, taking this to the ports, right? So utilizing the internal infrastructure or some of the rivers that they have up north, right? So you still got to go, I don't know, you you still have to go about 1,000 kilometers to the closest, a riverbed that can take the barges. But now, instead of going 2,500 kilometers down to Santos or Paranaguá, you go about 1,000 kilometers to the riverside, right? So you get there, you put it in barges, and the barges take it up to the northern ports, and then you're good to go.
So the second half is more affordable. The river barges, it's more affordable. That's interesting.
Exactly. So he makes it. I always say this. I have a case where, and it shows you the entrepreneurial spirit of Brazilian farmers. A dear friend of ours that is a client, it's been a client for almost 10 years now. And I remember he called me, I don't know, 7 years ago, something like that. And he goes, "Hey, come visit. I want to show you something." So we get there and we hop on a plane and we land in this place in the middle of nowhere. So right at the foot of the Amazon forest, right? And meaning you get out of the southern Amazon and then you kind of go down a little bit. It's literally where there's nothing, right? And I'm like, "What are you here to show me?" He takes me to this riverbank, points to it and says, "I'm going to build a port." I go, "You're going to do what?" "You're a farmer." He goes, "I know. But I know that I can get at least 300,000 tons of, corn and soybeans out through here. I already did the study and I'm going to invest in this. I'm going to do a port." And I'm like, so he tells me the story and I go, "Absolutely, you should." And they go, "Yeah, there's a lot of people trying to tell me not to do it, especially the big exporters are trying to tell me not to do it." Well, turns out they're trying to tell him not to do it because they didn't want a competitor, because now they all have ports right beside his port. He actually did build a port.
Wow.
And he moves over 1 million metric tons through those ports per year now. He's a farmer.
It's crazy.
So it shows you it's an entrepreneurial spirit. You allow capitalism to do its work, it will do it. And it benefits everybody else. Why? Because, yes, you know what? We live in an era now. If the Black Sea conflict happened 10 years ago, Brazil wasn't going to be able to fill that hole. Brazil filled the hole last year or 2 years ago when it happened. Right. So it's, it benefits the entire world. It just so happens also, you got to also say this when you talk about capitalism and economic incentives, Brazil benefits from having a much weaker currency than the dollar. And the weaker your currency is, the Brazilian real, so it's now 5-1. It takes 5 reais to buy $1. You know what? The cheaper, the more competitive your product is in the export market. And that's something that the U.S. farmer is fighting. And a lot of them don't understand it. A lot of them think, well, we have the strongest currency in the world. Yeah, that makes your product more expensive overseas. It makes it less competitive than Brazil, than Argentina, than Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And so the U.S. farmer, U.S. farming community needs to start understanding that you have a lot of great things going for you, but the competition has increased. And be careful, because the exact same thing that happened to the U.S. wheat market. U.S. used to be the dominant force in wheat 30 years ago. No longer. That is no longer the case, right? The Black Sea is now the dominant force in wheat. You have other parts you have Australia, you have Europe, you have Argentina. Brazil is still a net importer, but very, very soon it could become a net exporter of wheat as well. Don't doubt it.
I was going to ask you about wheat. So Brazil can grow wheat. Yeah, Brazil has the geography rather, and everything they need to grow wheat. Why haven't they to date? Is it just that soy and corn have been more soy and corn have higher margins?
And cotton, soy, corn, and cotton. I mean, cotton, for instance, Brazil just surpassed the United States this year in production and exports of cotton. Okay. So if you would have said that 5 years ago, you would have been like, what? Or 10 years ago.
What about cotton? How important is coffee in Brazil still? I know they're
very
globally
largest exporter.
But is that just it's not new money, I guess. Is there still growth in coffee in the same way, or was that all planted 100 years ago and it's been kind of just...
Yeah, coffee was the first big driving. So I'll give you an example. It's a great question. When I was growing up in Londrina, northern Paraná, in southern Brazil, coffee is really what made the town. Mm-hmm. So Londrina, it's called Londrina. It's Lodrina. And it's a city today of about 700,000 people, but it was founded in the 30s, okay, by English settlers. And the reason the name of the town is Londrina means Little London, right? So it was founded by those guys. And again, it was the guys that came after coffee. Coffee was, the coffee farmers back in the day, when you take that region of Brazil, São Paulo State, Paraná State, Minas Gerais, those were the folks with the big money back in the day, right? Yep. And then it wasn't until really 2005-ish or so that soybeans started really coming on board. Why? Because China became a major soybean importer in the mid-2000s. And that's when things really changed. And again, I talk about economic incentives, right? So then so it's a great question. The coffee trade is still gigantic in Brazil, but the growth is going much more towards soybeans, corn, and cotton recently.
Okay. There's a great statistic. Tell me if this is right or wrong, but I read that if you broke out Minas Gerais as a country, it would be the largest coffee producer in the world. And then the rest of Brazil would still be the second largest coffee producer in the world.
I can't confirm that in front of me right now, but I'll tell you something right now. I would not bet. Right? Yeah. I would not bet against that stat. I would not bet against. It makes sense. It makes sense.
Okay, well, let's get back to the fertilizer point though. Before I ask you about some of the current market stuff. So Brazil does import fertilizer, right? Are they self-sufficient today? Is there a domestic fertilizer industry that's relevant or not at all?
Well, again, Brazilian farmers are very entrepreneurial, and the folks involved in Brazilian agriculture. Again, Brazilian agriculture corresponds to about 1/3 of Brazilian GDP growth, right? So you got to keep that in mind. In the U.S., that number is below 10%. So when you have a sector of your economy that's responsible for 1/3 of your GDP, and by the way, that is really making your balance of payments and your exports just skyrocket, you're going to keep investing in it. And so, yes, Brazil is a major, obviously, importer of fertilizers, but I just don't understand the argument when people say that. They say, okay, so you're telling me the U.S. doesn't import from Canada? The U.S. doesn't import. Do you understand? There's so many layers to this that Brazil right now, for instance, imports a lot of fertilizer from Russia, some from Canada as well, et cetera. But there is also a very large community now doing investments for different types of fertilizers, sort of for the next generation of fertilizers. And Brazil is at the forefront of that. And I'm not going to say Brazil is going to become self-sustainable in fertilizers, but maybe not import as much as they currently do.
Okay. So I didn't ask you this before, so if you don't have anything off the top of your head, but I wanted to ask you about the importance of Planos Safra, because it's a question I get all the time, especially related to like some of the commodity stocks in Brazil. So is there anything you could say about what is the Planos Safra? Because it's got a pretty big, number on it, like 360 billion or something like that, reais. So how important is that to the Brazilian agro industry?
I'll say this to you. I told you I cover, my MD Commodities, our firm covers around 10 million acres of land in Brazil. This is the first time in the last probably 10 years that anybody has asked me or talked about Planos Safra.
Okay.
What I mean by that is it is a great question, but Brazilian agriculture does not rely heavily on subsidies. It doesn't rely heavily. It doesn't rely heavily. I'm not saying that there are no the types of subsidies are more incentives, right? So they're incentives where, the farmer can go out and buy maybe machinery at reduced interest rates, or they can buy pickup trucks or, equipment for the farm at reduced interest rates. Or for instance, you don't have direct payment subsidies to the Brazilian farmer. Those do not exist.
Yeah, right? I asked you too because I noticed the same thing. It's the first time I had ever, I might have read about it years ago once or twice, but it was the first time I ever saw, continued headlines, and I would get questions about it. And I'm not really sure.
No, because again, a lot of the folks, again, they're trying to find holes and things. And the Planos Safra really was a thing way, way, way back when. We're talking years ago when Brazilian farming was subsistential, right? I remember a time, again, I grew up in a very agricultural part of the country there, right? I was surrounded by cornfields at the time. Not a lot of soybean fields in the 90s, again, because you didn't talk a lot about soybeans because you still didn't have a world superpower such as China buying as much soybeans as they've been buying recently. But it's, it was interesting because a lot of farmers back then, especially in the South, you didn't have the margins that you have these days. You didn't have, these guys literally were fighting for their everyday subsistence, if you will, right? So not that they didn't make money, they made money, but it wasn't what it is today. And so back then you needed some more direct subsidies to help the farmer continue producing, right? But now, again, you have some programs out there, Planos Safra, et cetera. There are programs, but when you take into consideration the amount of subsidy and direct subsidies, Brazilian farmers rely mainly on one thing, the market. The market tells them what to do. Give you an example. The market right now is telling them to plant the soybeans. The planting is delayed in Brazil right now. Weather has been a little rocky here to start the new crop season, the new crop 23-24. But they're still going to plant a lot of soybeans. But the corn that comes in after the soybean season, a lot of farmers right now are saying, you know what, I'm not going to plant as much corn because corn prices are not that great right now. They're not really paying me enough to take the weather risk that comes with planting the crop a little bit late. And so I might not take as big of a chance as I would before. Now, again, Brazil's still going to harvest a gigantic corn crop. As long as weather is okay, they still could harvest their second or third largest corn crop. Okay. But again, Brazilian farmers respond to market forces much more than any type of direct subsidy that may exist in certain regions.
Okay, interesting. So you touched on the weather too. And I guess since I asked you about the Planos Safra headlines I'll ask you about the weather headlines I've been seeing. Because you mentioned the weather's rocky. And I've seen everything from, it doesn't matter to absolute doom and gloom that it's going to be the worst crop ever. So what's going on with the weather in Brazil? Is it relevant? What do people need to know?
Anybody that says it's doom and gloom right now is automatically disqualifying themselves from having any sort of credibility on the subject. So if you hear anybody on Twitter right now that you see, you can block them, you can mute them. They have no idea. They have no idea what they're talking about. Again, these are folks that are out. No,
I like ballistics.
They just don't have, and that's the part. Yeah. Well, it drives me nuts, right? Because you're sitting here, Patrick. The amount of things I see written about Brazil that it's just mind blowing, and it you know it.
I've been 11 years, 12 years almost in Brazil. Like it's most people think I say I live in Sao Paulo. Most people think I live in Rio de Janeiro on the beach, right? That's
right. They're like,
the beach must be nice. Like, man, I live in the fourth biggest city in the world. It's like it's not. There's no beach.
Oh my gosh! But at the end of the day, though, listen. Weather. Don't get me wrong. It's been challenging.
Okay.
But you got to understand. You got to have a little context to things, right? So November is equivalent to June. November in Brazil is equivalent to June in the U.S. And June in the U.S., even though it is important to the crop, it's not the key factor. The key factor for the crop in the U.S. is July and early August. Well, Brazil, the key period is December and early January. So we're having some issues right now. For instance, delayed planting that is now delaying the planting of second corn crops. So it's going to reduce some of that area. Some, keyword some. Yeah, all of that is happening. Maybe you have some soybean replanting right now. But what folks don't understand is we're still in the ideal soybean planting window for Brazil, right? So, again, it's the crop is going to potentially not be as big as it could have been to start, but we're nowhere close to needing to hit the panic button.
No reason to think the farmers aren't going to make money on this year's soybean crop.
No. Now, again, if the rains don't arrive in 3 to 4 weeks' time, like arrive and stay and really, you need a big, a continuous soaking here to alleviate some of the stress, then you're going to have issues. Now we need to start cutting the crop. But again, the farmers that harvest will make a lot of money because prices will go higher if you have a drought, something like that, right? And so again, you have situations like that. But I did a post on Twitter, I think it was this week, and I said, does the world really need another 160 million metric tons of soybeans out of Brazil? And the answer is no, we don't. Give you some perspective. Brazil, the potential for this year's crop was north of 170 million metric tons. Okay. Last year, Brazil produced its largest crop ever at 157 million metric tons. The second largest is 137, so 20 million metric tons below that.
Okay.
So in the last 4 years, you went right from 137 down to 120, 128, something like that, back up to 157. And this year, the potential was 170 plus. Now, these issues considered, maybe we'll end up at somewhere around 155 or 160. But the post I did was, even if Brazil produced 140, if you lost 30 to 35 million metric tons of soybeans, which is a lot to lose, South America could still harvest its largest crop ever. South America as a whole, when you take into consideration Argentina.
Yeah.
So again, look, there's a lot of context there, and
so even with a drought,
not the time to panic.
Even with a drought, the market still risks oversupply.
In my opinion, yes.
Okay.
In my opinion, yes.
Interesting.
Simply because of the sheer growth. Last year, for instance, Argentina lost over half of its crop last year, and the market still was oversupplied. We have right now the largest carry out. So basically, the amount of soybeans that are being carried from one year to the next, farmers are holding on to the largest ever. So that's with Argentina losing half of its crop last year.
Okay.
And so again, people, you know what it is, Patrick? I was at a conference years ago, and a commodities conference, and the speaker said something, and I agree wholeheartedly. It's not sexy to talk about lower food prices. It's not sexy to be bearish, agriculture commodities. Right. You want to be bullish because you want to attract investment flow. You want to attract speculators. You want to attract, so there's a lot of nonsense that gets spewed constantly, always trying to find a bullish tilt to things that are simply just flat out not bullish right now.
Right.
And I think I will be ready to be bullish when I believe the time comes, when my analysis and our analysis tells us that we need to be bullish. Right now, we're watching weather. Aside from weather, there is absolutely no reason to be bullish in our eyes.
Okay. So I got to ask you about one other Brazilian commodity market. We talked about, the disconnect between what Americans think their agro market is. And I grew up in the U.S., right? So Florida orange juice was always a thing. And I assumed the U.S. was the biggest orange juice market in the world. And you've seen the chart, obviously. Orange juice just hit an all-time high. Looks like a blow-off top, maybe. And I looked it up, and Brazil is 72% roughly of the world's orange juice exports. I don't know. That blew my mind. So I don't know who to ask except you. What's going on with the orange juice market? Because it's clearly a Brazilian market. So what happened?
It is. Again, it goes back to economic incentives. The U.S. farmer has not had economic incentives. Now, again, you've had other issues as well, disease taking over a lot of the crop regions in Florida, specifically speaking, but also urban sprawl. And, when it pays you more to, when a developer comes and tells you, hey, I'm going to give you X millions of dollars to buy up your land, and you've come from a few years of struggling to make a decent margin on your orange juice production, be it because of weather issues or because of disease or be it just simply because the market wasn't paying you enough to do it, you know what? You're going to sell it. You're going to sell it, and you're going to let the developers do what they do. So what's happened is U.S. has been increasingly increasingly decreasing, right? The U.S. has been decreasing its planted area.
It's not just Brazil growing; it's actually the U.S. is just growing less oranges.
The U.S. is growing less oranges, and with that, the economic incentive goes to Brazil to produce more because they have the economies of scale to do so, right? So again, and I always say, once you understand one commodity, you understand multiple commodities. At the end of the day, who has the economies of scale to be able to produce at a certain scale, at a certain volume? Brazil has it.
Where are the Brazilian orange farms? Bahia? Where is the Brazilian orange region?
No, it's very similar to the coffee belt. Very, very similar to the coffee belt in Brazil as well. So, in Paraná, there's plenty of them. They're really near the tropics there. It's so the Tropic of Capricorn there at the bottom. You have Paraná, you have some São Paulo, you have some of those areas. For instance, you mentioned Bahia. You talk about an area. Bahia, for me, is one of the most fascinating stories in Brazil. 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you said, I'm going to go produce soybeans, cotton, and corn in Bahia, and I'm going to do fantastically well doing that. People are going to laugh at you. They're going to be like, you can't grow anything in Bahia. It doesn't rain in Bahia. Listen, man, again, we have some clients that 40 years ago, 35 years ago, 30 years ago, left everything they knew in southern Brazil, all the comforts that they had and they went to Western Bahia and they took a bet. They took a bet on themselves. They took a bet on that land and the potential. And I'm telling you something right now, you go visit Western Bahia right now, and it's one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. I was just there. I was there in March visiting some clients and speaking in front of 1,500 people on a farm and just speaking about the markets and things like that. And the corn that I saw, I mean, it looked like American corn, the stuff. I mean, the cotton that was there was beautiful. I mean, the soybeans, you're talking about 55, 60 bushel, 65, 70 bushel acre soybeans. So it's absolutely fascinating what has happened. It really, really is.
Yeah, it's amazing. So what actually caused the huge price spike in orange juice then? Like most recently, like is there a market dynamic that you can identify that caused such a blow off top?
When you pull up a chart, I don't have that in front of me right now, but when you pull up a chart of U.S. production and how much it's been decreasing recently, and again, it wasn't just the decrease in area, but you had some major. I forgot the exact name of, because I don't trade the OJ market, but it's when a major disease came and hit the U.S. crop, and it took a lot of oranges out of the market that unexpectedly. So when that happens, it's what we call a supply shock. It wasn't a demand shock; it was a supply shock, and so now the market has to work through that. But you just mentioned blow off top. Again, I don't want to be calling tops here, but you want to watch Trading Places. You're more than welcome to go watch Trading Places and see what Eddie tells you.
It looks like it. I have no idea. I don't know. I just saw the chart, and it was crazy price action.
I'm with you. It does to me as well look like a blow off top. I mean, it's very difficult to try to get in front of that crazy truck. It's you look at the OJ market, you look at cocoa, you look at sugar. Those are three markets right now that are simply on fire. Coffee is also going up a decent bit here recently, right? So not nearly as high as it was last year, and so these commodity markets from time to time, you can simply just look at a chart and identify a supply shock. When it really it takes off all at once like that, it was a supply shock. Sometimes you have a supply shock alongside a demand shock, like for instance, in the early 2000s when you had low production years, right there around 2007, 2008, prior to the great financial crisis, the world was going to run out of food again, apparently, because at the time you had a supply shock with reduced production in Brazil. United States at the time was the major dominant force in soybeans and corn, but you also had a demand shock because China was now in the market for soybeans in numbers that were never seen before. And that's why you saw prices just take off. So it's really interesting. The OJ market, the cocoa market, and the sugar market right now are quite interesting.
Great. Is there any other market or country in South America with something going on currently you think it's worth talking about, or you think we covered?
Well, I mean, Brazil is the best country in South America. It really should be the only country. I mean, they have another. I'm just kidding.
Hey, no, but you hit on a point though. Actually, you gave me a good question. A lot of people talk about like, I want to do South America. What country should I focus on? And for me, Brazil.
Yeah, look, Brazil is the main force, due to its sheer size and potential. And like I said, it's self-sustainable and things like that. Again, lots of problems there still. But even with those problems, this very well, Patrick. You've lived there for a while. You know Brazil quite well yourself. So it's far from being a perfect land. Far from that. That doesn't exist. There's many, many issues, but it is also a blessed land with a lot of opportunity and with a lot of potential. Argentina, quite frankly, Argentina saddens me a little bit because Argentina is a country of beautiful people. No, I'm not talking just physically. I'm saying just beautiful inside and out, and just a beautiful soul and incredible potential. But unfortunately, the not geopolitical, but the macroeconomic and the political issues that have been just hounding that country for the last 20, 30 years, they just can't get out of their own way.
Yeah, and when people compare Brazil and Argentina, it's hard for me because Brazil has such a diversified economy in comparison, and the human talent so
totally
diversified. Right. It's a one city country, Argentina, right? They have Buenos Aires.
It's different. Argentina, I'll say this to you. Argentina, I mean, there's you got Rosario, you got some other beautiful areas of the country aside from Buenos Aires, and Argentina is a country to me. That's what's sad to me because again, the potential there is
so
just enormous.
Right, yeah.
And they're right. And right now, I believe actually this coming up weekend, they have a huge decision in their hands.
Yep.
And they got the runoff election for president over there.
We'll see.
And, we keep our fingers crossed that they get things right.
Try something new,
they
right?
can get out of their own way.
It's insane
to
do the same thing again after, right? Try something. But I want to ask you one more cultural question then, because we talked about the kind of the downtrodden orange juice farmers in the U.S. And like culturally in the U.S., farming it's not really something young people think about. But agro in Brazil seems much more culturally like acceptable. It's exciting. Like, how would you describe like the agro culture in Brazil? Like, what is it like? 'Cause I like everyone I meet that does agro in Brazil. I mean, they're always great people. They've got great music. They seem to really like life. Like it seems like it's dignant jobs. Like they like what they do.
Yeah, there's an expression, and I'm sure you've heard it. O agro é pop. O agro é pop. Okay, so when you say o agro é pop, basically the agriculture in Brazil, it's part of pop culture now. Yeah. You go to Brazil and you listen to the main radio stations. What are they playing? Country music. You go to São Paulo and the big concerts. A lot of times you got guys and gals wearing cowboy hats, and you go to bull riding competitions. In the São Paulo, in the inner cities there in São Paulo State. Again, the agricultural culture in Brazil is pop culture. And again, it was not like that when I was there. When I was there in mid-90s, meaning before I moved and then I came to do my search my own path here in the United States with basketball and education. But once I went back and started working again in Brazil in the beginning of the millennia, it was quite interesting because I'm like, wait a second, agriculture now is quote unquote sexy.
It's cool, right?
Again, it's cool.
It's cool in Brazil.
It's something that...
One of the coolest stories, I'm a huge UFC fan, and Charles Oliveira, who's just the UFC champion, he's a kid from the city in Sao Paulo, right? And what did he do when he got some money? He started racing horses. He goes out there rides his little horse kitty. It's funny to see, but it's cool.
It's what they do. And honestly, it is. And if you're familiar with that like you are, you met some people from that industry, directly on the ground in Brazil, just fantastic people, fantastic people. And like you said, just a sheer love for life. And you go and visit you go to Mato Grosso State, that, cities that 20 years ago, 25 years ago didn't exist and now are thriving, small urban centers. When I say small, 100,000, 200,000 people, 300,000 people it was a village of less than 10,000 people 20 years ago, right? So again, agriculture has brought a lot of growth to Brazil, and it's fantastic to see. It really is fantastic to see. I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Pedro, this was awesome. I could talk to you all day. I'm fascinated by this industry, and I could ask you 50 more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. I love the optimism, man. But so where can people find you? Where can they learn more about MD Commodities? I'll link all of it in the show notes, but give them a send off.
Yeah, absolutely. So at PhD Chicago is my Twitter handle. My marketing team finally convinced me to start an Instagram, but that's in Portuguese only, so I'll leave that for another day. And but that's the easiest way. Just at PhD Chicago, you can find me. Send me a DM. My direct messages are open. That's how you and I connected. And I was very happy to connect with you, man. Thank you for the questions, for the curiosity, and for doing what you do. And bringing this information from different point of view, from different people and different perspectives. So I think that's the important thing too. It's not about Pedro said this. That has to be the universal truth. No, it's go seek out what you're doing. It's, different opinions on different things. And I just love what you're doing, man. And anytime I can help out, I'll be more than happy to do so.
Hey, man, the feeling's mutual. Whenever you want to come back on again, just let me know. We'll stay in touch for sure. But thanks, Pedro.
Awesome, my friend. Thank you, Patrick.